Welcome to the Butterfly Effect. I'm Chris Horner. This is stage 7 of Dauphine 2022. Now, hopefully you guys tuned into the GCN commentator, Brian Smith, because throughout today's stage, he has no idea what's happening in today's race. None whatsoever. And this is what I hate about commentators when they're commentating on races and giving bad advice, because then when I go on group rides, I have to listen to bike riders talk to me about what the real tactics were of today's stage, but they have no idea because they took them all from Brian Smith. Now, when we go back to the beginning of today's stage, you got to look and see that there's threats on general classifications. There's not huge time differences if you start taking it from Primož Roglič. Then, when we start today's stage, they've already gone over one big mountainous climb, and they had the Col de la Croix with just about 55 kilometers to go is when the cameras come on, and there's a group just under 20 riders up the front. Now, in that group, the guys you want to pay attention to is going to be Trek Segafredo, because Kenny Elisson's about 3.5 minutes behind Wout van Aert's time here from Jumbo-Visma, the race leader. Other rider that's the big threat up in this group, Luis Leon Sanchez, the Bahrain Victorious rider. He's at about 2:47, I believe, back on Wout van Aert's time. Keep that in mind. This is a big group. When they start the Col de la Croix, the time gap is already 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And then once we get a little bit further up the Col de la Croix, Luis Leon Sanchez is solidly race leader in this front group. Now, if I go back to this stage and talk about the commentator, Brian Smith, what he's telling all of you guys at home is that this is a great tactic for Bahrain Victorious to have a rider put in this front group, because then they can drop him back and he can start helping his teammates back there, Jack Haig and Damiano Caruso, who was second at last year's Giro d'Italia. That is not the plan. That is a terrible plan. It's the plan that Bahrain Victorious is thinking about, and it's the plan that Brian Smith is feeding to all you guys at home. Now, when the racing gets further up the climb, it's Mark Donovan. He's going solo up the front, and he's trying to put on some kind of show here, but this is a terrible tactic too, because Donovan, behind, you got 3 Trek Segafredo riders back there, and the one rider is Kenny Elissonde. He's got 2 teammates there that are willing to drill it up this Col de la Croix to help Kenny Elissonde try to get in the race leader's jersey and try to win today's stage 7 if possible. Jasper Stuyvens for Trek Segafredo, he's doing the bulk of the work up there. But Tom Squeens, he'll do some work there for his teammate Kenny Elissonde too. That'll bring back Mark Donovan for sure. Back in the peloton, it's going slow because it's only the 2 Chris's pulling back there. Laporte and Harper, they're doing a great job because they don't need to win today's stage. They just need to keep the yellow jersey, either with Wout van Aert, Primož Roglič, or heck, you can give it there to Jonas Vingegaard at the end of today's stage 2. It doesn't matter because all 3 are the highest on the general classification here, basically, with no GC guys in front of any of the 3 Jumbo-Visma riders. So with that pace being set smooth back there, it's curb to curb. You see no one's suffering really in the peloton back there until it's X that gets on the front and starts pulling when the time gap's at about 4 minutes and 20 seconds, the largest that I'll see while I was sitting on the Chesterfield today. X is pulling hard up front when they brought back Mark Donovan. Now we're going to see an attack by Movistar's Mühlberger. Mühlberger throws in attack. This still isn't a great plan because Trek Segafredo still have numbers, and the time gap right back there to X peloton being led is starting to drop, and it's dropping fast because the X boys are putting on a display back here. They'll take off about 1 minute and 30 seconds before finally FDJ will take over the front for the peloton back there. Up front, let's get back up to the breakaway because that group of about 18 riders just disintegrated into smaller pieces. Mulhouse was up the road. Kenny Elissonde threw in a big, vicious attack when his last teammate, Tom Squeens, starts to pull off the front. You look in the picture, Tom Squeens is in the upper right. On the left, at the back of the picture there, is going to be Kenny Elissonde. He's going to put on a magical display here, trying to win the stage for Trek Segafredo and possibly take the race yellow jersey here at the end of stage 7 with Kenny's attack. You'll see him bridge up to Mulhouse, but then 3 other riders are coming behind. It's Pierre Rolland. It's Movistar's Carlos Verona. He's attached on there. And Victor Lefebvre from Cofidis. Those 3 will bridge up to the front 2 riders. Now you got 5 guys in the front group. Kenny Elissonde's getting a little unhappy though because the group is not gelling well together. Mühlberger will throw an attack. We'll see Kenny Elissonde. He'll start arguing at this moment with Verona. Verona's like, hey, that's my teammate up the front. When we listen to Brian Smith, the commentator from GCN, at this point in time, he says, Yeah, why would Verona want to start pulling right now with his teammate up the front? Well, Brian Smith, if you look back to the peloton now being drilled by FDJ, you know that time gap at about 2.5 minutes is not that much time when you still haven't even finished the Col de la Croix fair. If that group behind really starts chasing hard, you're going to bring everybody back. Kenny Elissonde's had enough. He'll bridge back up to Mühlberger, and then he'll start to argue with Mühlberger up there, who now won't take a pull because Carlos Verona's in the back. This is bad chemistry here for Movistar. If this group slows down too much, certainly the GC favorites in that back group there with FDJ pulling like a madman, they're going to bring this group back. Up front, the five come back together now that Kenny Elissonde and Mühlberger start arguing. With five guys up front, we're going to see attack by Victor Lafay, but it's short-lived. Then again, it's Verona that throws in a next attack. Pierre Latour's on it right away. Behind in the peloton with FDJ pulling hard, we're going to see Enric Mas Movistar come out the back, and his teammates right in front of him, Gorka Izagirre. You know the speeds are fast if Enric Mas is getting dropped here on Col de la Croix fair. Shortly after that, we see the picture. It's Wout van Aert. He's at the back of the bunch, and it won't take much longer before Wout van Aert comes out of the back of the group with 1.4 kilometers to go before we crest the top of the Col de la Croix fair. Now, Brian Smith, the GCN commentator, again, he jumps in and he goes, I knew 100% we were going to see Wout van Aert come out the back. Oh, Brian Smith, you knew 100% with 1.4 plus I'll give you a couple minutes there, so we'll call it 1.6 kilometers to go, that the legendary rider Wout van Aert, who's wearing yellow, who's won 2 stages here already at Dauphine, who went second in the time trial. He owns the green jersey, sprint leader's jersey, but you knew that he was going to get dropped on today's stage. You're cutting it a little bit close to be that brave to come out publicly and say you knew with 100% that Wout van Aert's going to get dropped with 1.5 kilometers to go on today's stage, give or take 100 meters. Now up front, when the group of 5 go over the KOM, they got about a 2-minute and 5-second gap on the peloton behind, and they'll drop over the top with Carlos Verona throwing in attack on the descent. Pierre Latour can't go downhill. He opens up a gap to the Movistar rider. Behind in the group of 3, Kenny Elissonde is still arguing. Now he's arguing again with Mulhouse because Mulhouse won't come through. And again, I got to agree with the Trek Segafredo rider here. There's no time to mess around when you got the big teams back there pulling, possibly wanting to bring this back to have a shot at a big-time GC win. Plus time bonus seconds is at the end of today's stage. Now, while Kenny Elissonde and Mühlberger were talking, we're on the right there, it's Victor Lafay Cofidis that throws in attack. Now the 3 riders will come back together, and we're going to see Victor Lafay now arguing with the Movistar rider Mühlberger. As they're arguing, it's Kenny Elissonde that throws in attack. He's bridging across up to the 2 riders in front. He'll pass straight by Pierre Rolland, who can't ride his bike downhill, and drop Pierre Rolland, and then he'll bridge up to Carlos Verona, the Movistar rider. Those 2 guys will start finally working somewhat together, and then we'll see them start arguing again on the next bump with about 14.5 kilometers to go. Now, back in the peloton before they crest the KOM with less than a kilometer to go, it was Bahrain Victorious that got on the front. Bahrain Victorious throws in an attack, and it's because they're bridging up to their teammate that was in the front, Luis Leon Sanchez. Now, Brian Smith, GCN commentator again, he starts bragging about, yeah, this is what I was talking about. This is why you got to have a rider in the break so you can pull him back and he can start getting on the front and pulling your teammates up the road. Now, Brian Smith, what are you talking about? Let's look at the picture here going over the KOM. It's 3 Bahrain Victorious riders on the front, and guess what? It's 3 Jumbo-Visma riders sitting on the wheel getting a free ride. At one point in time, we'll see Primož Roglič. He's pouring water over his head, spraying his face off, getting a nice good rest before this final 6-kilometer climb to the finish of today's stage starts. The whole Jumbo-Visma squad is back there resting, all 3 guys, while 3 Bahrain Victorious riders, 1 Luis Leon Sanchez, is pulling on the front. Brian Smith from GCN commentator, he's all excited because his plan worked exactly as he had been talking about the whole time up Col de la Croix fair. But he's forgot to tell you guys that up the road there is going to be Kenny Elissonde, Trek Segafredo, who's a threat on the general classification. Brian Smith, There is no reason for Bahrain Victorious to be chasing at this point in time. Kenny Elissonde's just a few seconds behind on the general classification lead, the virtual lead of Primož Roglič going down this descent. But Brian Smith, the GCN commentator, is telling all you fans at home that this is a great plan to have Bahrain Victorious in that front group, drop back, and now pull 3 Jumbo-Visma riders sitting on, having a break back there while they're eating, taking a shower with their water bottles, putting in calories, getting themselves all ready for this final steep, hard climb to the finish. Now, when the climb starts up front, Carlos Verona and Kenny Elissonde, who did some arguing, they finally put it back together to start this climb together, but Carlos Verona starts acceleration on the pedals the moment the climb begins and opens the gap to Kenny Elissonde, the Trek Segafredo rider. Now, in all fairness to Kenny Elissonde, he had raced this race 100% tactically, right? Movistar were almost knuckleheads on today's stage. Hell, I'm going to go ahead and call them knuckleheads. Their tactics wasted so much time that they deserve to lose this stage. But up the road is Carlos Verona. He's pushing hard on the pedals. He's getting a gap back there on the Trek Segafredo rider Kenny Elissonde, who just can't close it. Now behind in the GC favorite group there. First to hit the front's going to be AG2R, and then FDJ get back on the front with 3 riders, and they're trying to blow this field up and put some distance between themselves and Jumbo-Visma, but Primož Roglič is on form. Jonas Vingegaard, he's riding good with FDJ pulling. They're down to 2 guys now, and it's Storer that's the last rider on front there for Davide Gaudu. He'll keep pulling, and then we'll see the first attack come from Rubens Guerrero. EF Education throws in a big attack. He's got a gap on all the favorites back there. Next to throw an attack, Louis Meintjes from Intermarché. Intermarché, every race you see this season of 2022, they're displaying fine form. Louis Meintjes trying to get up to the front leader there of Rubens Guerrero. He can't quite close the gap. Behind it's Brandon McNulty, the American rider, that throws an attack. And let me rewind the video just a little bit, because on the descent with 20 kilometers to go, the American kid McNulty flatted. He's had some bad luck in the individual time trial here at Dauphine, and now with 20 kilometers to go, he had bad luck again. But guess what? He's putting in a big tack. He made it back to the front group and throwing in an attack here against the favorites. Now Jumbo-Visma's had just about enough playing around. Jonas Vingegaard throws in his own attack. He's got a little bit of company there from the AG2R rider Ben O'Connor, and then his teammate Primož Roglič looking calm as a bomb sitting on the wheel. Jonas Vingegaard will look back. He'll see over his left shoulder that Primož Roglič is there, and he'll start setting tempo. And guess what happens? Bahrain Victorious fly out the back. Brian Smith, here comes your tactics. You gave Jumbo-Visma a free ride all the way down to descent, even though they had a threat on the general classification with Luis Leon Sanchez that could have put big pressure on Jumbo-Visma throughout today's stage. Remember, he didn't have to win today's stage. The number one objective for the Bahrain Victorious squad when Luis Leon Sanchez was in that front group should have just been to stay in that group for as long as he possibly can and gain as much time, so that it would have put pressure on Jumbo-Visma to pull as hard as they can. Instead, Sanchez dropped back and started pulling Primož Roglič and Jumbo-Visma all the way to the finish. Now Jonas Vingegaard is throwing down on the pedals, and Bahrain Victorious is going out the back. Brian Smith, congratulations on your fantastic commentary here on today's Stage 7 of Dauphine. Now let's get back into what's really happening, because up front, Jonas Vingegaard has closed the gaps to all the GC favorites. The only rider left standing up front, Carlos Verona. The seconds are down to about 30 with just about a kilometer to go. Let me remind you, on this stage, it'll crest the top of the climb at about 1.2 kilometers, and then it'll descend all the way to about 500 meters, and then it's an uphill drag. So just with about 2.5 kilometers to go, maybe 2.25, Primož Roglič throws in the attack that everyone should see coming except for Brian Smith. As Primož Roglič is throwing in that massive attack, he's closing gap quickly up to Carlos Verona. Carlos Verona sees that he's close to the summit of today's stage. He throws in a big acceleration, crosses over the summit. Now he's got to bomb down the descent, and he's got to do a last 500 meters as hard as he can because the number 2 best rider in the world, Brian Smith, his name is called Primož Roglič. In case you don't know, Primož Roglič is coming fast. He's trying to close the gap. He can't quite get it up to Carlos Verona, the Movistar rider, who holds off the Slovenian to win today's Stage 7 mountainous stage over some legendary climbs, Col de la Croix Fair, and finish it off on today's stage, but just by a few seconds over Jumbo-Visma. When Primož Roglič crosses the line, he doesn't have to wait too long to see his teammate back there, Jonas Vingegaard, who rounds out the podium in third with Ben O'Connor. Jonas Vingegaard put on a display here in today's stage to set up Primož Roglič to grasp and just take the race leader's jersey here for Jumbo-Visma to keep it in their camp. Sure, Wout van Aert lost the jersey, but still, you gotta believe Primož Roglič was happy on his form this close to the Tour de France, and Jonas Vingegaard's looking fine. Now, Steven Kruijswijk, when we're talking about later for the Tour de France form, he came off with about 4 kilometers to go, then fought and got back on and came off somewhere after that when all the big attacks started coming. So Steven Kruijswijk needs a little bit more form for the Tour de France, but I gotta believe he's gonna make the squad when he's still holding on to the front group with under 4 kilometers to go on the last final climb of today's stage. Now, when we're talking about other tactics, Brian Smith, again, another knucklehead commentary made here on today's stage. He said Jumbo-Visma must have been disappointed that they couldn't win today's stage. Brian Smith, they're racing for the overall general classification, and they're racing to get their guys ready to win the Tour de France with Primož Roglič. I guarantee you there is no way that Primož Roglič was upset about the outcome of today's stage when he almost caught Verona there at the finish from Movistar, and his teammate finished third on his wheel to put them 1 and 2 on the general classification. There's a little interview with Jonas Vingegaard talking about his attack, and again, Brian Smith wants to talk about how, well, maybe that was a no-no to be attacking your race leader back there, Primož Roglič. But at that point in time, that's an okay move, because if he goes, Primož Roglič can sit on anything, and Jonas Vingegaard is still race leader if he goes for Jumbo-Visma. So, everything you heard from Brian Smith, the commentator from GCN today, was wrong. He was giving you the cover, and the cover was not right. You got to flip it over, read a little bit deeper, look a little bit deeper in the tactics, and realize Kenny Elizon, Luis Leon Sanchez were the biggest threat in today's stage, and they just need to keep that pace going as hard as they can. Bahrain Victorious should have never been on the front pull in Jumbo-Visma at any point in time in this race, and certainly not right before the final climb starts, but they did anyways. Brian Smith, you're the big knucklehead on today's stage. Movistar, I'm calling you guys a knucklehead. I know you won the stage, but there's nothing worse than to hear when the rider wins the stage and someone says, well, they won, they had to be right. Today's tactics with Movistar just barely made it, when realistically Carlos Verona's win here, he could have dropped anybody from this break on the final climb and would have had more of a cushion against all the GC favorites. Instead, he cut it close, and he had to suffer to the absolute limit in order to win today's stage. So Movistar is still a knucklehead in my book. Don't tell me just because they won, they're not, because tactically it was a nightmare from Movistar. Kenny Elizon, Victor Lefebvre were absolutely 100% correct to be yelling at the Movistar riders and arguing throughout the finish of today's stage when they should have just been working well together. Now, tomorrow's stage is a big one, right? But Jumbo-Visma are solidly in the front position, wanting to win here at the Dauphine. We look at the interview from Primož Roglič. He said the main objective here at the Dauphine is to get himself ready for the Tour de France. So if he has any doubts about tomorrow's stage, you know Jonas Vingegaard will come good. But when they're tacking up that last climb, and again, I'm going to go one more dig on Brian Smith, because why not? He was a nightmare commentator on today's race. When Ethan Hayter was at the beginning of the final climb here in the front group after he'd gotten dropped just at the top of the Col de la Croix Fair, Brian Smith has talked about how excellent Ethan Hayter's ride was. And it was. No doubt about it. That part of Brian Smith's story is correct. But when he says it's better than Wout van Aert, are you crazy, Brian Smith? Have you not been watching the last 6 stages here at Dauphine and today's stage 7? Because Wout van Aert's won 2 stages, went podium in other stages, got the green jersey still, wore yellow, and by wearing the yellow in today's stage, that allowed Jumbo-Visma just to sit back and relax going up the last climb and open up the attacks from all the other riders so that Jumbo-Visma can see who's got form and who doesn't, and then allow Primož Roglič just to light everybody up and take the victory and time on today's stage. So again, Brian Smith, the GCN commentator, when you're talking about Paris-Nice stage, when Primož Roglič brought back Gino Mader, and you're comparing that stage to this stage, that is not even close. They're completely different stages. That year in Paris-Nice, Primož Roglič had massive time on all the GC favorites, had a super strong mountain climb that year in Paris-Nice, and then when you fast forward here to Dauphine and you look at today's stage, Primož Roglič had to tack on today's stage because he doesn't know for sure how good his team is climbing. Remember, Steven Kruijswijk was solid but didn't pull on the front, still got dropped just under 4 kilometers to go. The rest of his team, though, wasn't solid on the climb, so that only leaves one Jonas Vingegaard. There's a big difference, Brian Smith, between Paris-Nice back in the day when Primož Roglič won that stage against Gino Mader versus today's stage. They're completely different. You can't even compare them together. Now make sure you guys like and subscribe, because tomorrow's going to be an exciting stage here, and we're going to get to find out just how strong of a mountain team Jumbo-Visma have here at Dauphine on the last final stage. There is no question about Primož Roglič or Jonas Vingegaard. They're the two best in the world right here at Dauphine. But keep in mind, tomorrow's Sunday, so Tour of Swiss starts. So we got to ask ourselves there when we're talking about Peter Sagan, is he going to be at the Tour of Swiss with good form or not? Last time we seen him racing, he was dropping out of races and then came over to the U.S. to do some altitude training in Utah. So tomorrow's Tour of Swiss, along with the last day here at Dauphine, leave us plenty of bike racing to watch from the Chesterfield. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next edition real soon.